Okay, so diving in today on something that actually came from you, the listener, you sent us over some info on this company, MVHealth, and well, it definitely piqued our interest.
Yeah.
Sexual health devices, well, it's an area that's ripe for disruption.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And they really do position themselves, at the forefront of this whole space.
Hmm.
Doctor recommended, clinically proven, and like you said, disrupting, and they really emphasize that they've got a decade of experience behind them. They're not just sort of popping up.
Yeah, in that decade, it looks like they've been busy. Like they've developed a really impressive range of devices, and they're all FDA registered, patented technology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so not messing around. And they're talking about a user base of over 200,000 people and a 95% efficacy rate that they claim. So, I mean, those are some pretty big numbers.
Yeah, those are some numbers that definitely make you want to dive a little deeper for sure.
Oh. Yeah, and for you listening in, I think that the heart of this deep dive is really to understand how MV Health is looking to kind of, redefine this whole treatment of sexual dysfunction through these devices, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to be a combination of like really innovative, you know, design solid science behind it, and they already got a good chunk of the market. So we really want to unpack what makes them unique, and could this be a real game changer in the space? That's what we're hoping to uncover.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
So let's start with what they actually offer, right? The product line itself, and it's quite extensive. Like they have devices for both men and women. So on the women's side, we're seeing names like Crescendo 2, Legato Sotofremocopula.
Yeah.
And these seem to target all sorts of different areas. Like you've got the pelvic floor, the vagina, the labia, even some tackling period pain, breast health, and stuff related to menopause. So
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
yeah, it's a pretty wide range. And what's really cool is how specific some of the designs are. Like the Crescendo 2, for example.
Hmm.
They've actually designed it to mimic the feeling of two fingers. So it allows for this like really targeted stimulation, both internally and externally. So it seems like they really understand the female anatomy and how to use different types of stimulation effectively.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually, like the level of thought that's going into these.
Yeah. And then on the men's side, they have Tenuto 2, Tenuto Mini Molto, and Forza E.
Hmm.
And these focus on areas like the penis and perineum, the prostate, and then, issues like erectile dysfunction and ejaculation problems. They're, again, a pretty wide spectrum.
Yeah.
And the Molto, that one is designed to mimic the index finger specifically for prostate stimulation. So again, that attention to detail and anatomy is there. And they actually say this outright, that they're the only company that creates devices for this entire spectrum of men's and women's sexual health issues. So I think that's a key part of the recipe.
Yeah. And from a practical standpoint, it looks like a lot of these devices are HSA and FSA eligible, which,
That,
really makes a difference in terms of affordability.
for sure.
Yeah. So that accessibility is definitely a big plus. Okay. So we've kind of looked at what they offer, but now let's think about like how MB Health is actually tackling those real world challenges that we see with treating sexual health issues, especially from the clinician side. One of the biggest things they talk about is cost and accessibility compared to traditional treatments.
Yeah, and they're making a pretty strong argument there, right?
Right.
Like they really emphasize the potential cost savings, especially when you compare it to something like traditional pelvic floor therapy, where you're looking at a device that costs maybe $300 versus a whole course of therapy, which could be upwards of $9,000. I mean, that's a huge difference for people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely huge, especially when you think about it in terms of healthcare costs overall.
Yeah, right. And then they also point out that, their devices allow for this consistent treatment at home, so you don't have to keep going back to the clinic for appointments, which is a huge time saver and, just more convenient for people.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like, what are some of the broader implications of that shift?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is it could really improve access for people who just can't afford those really expensive in-office treatments, and it makes you wonder, like, how insurance companies are going to adapt to this kind of thing, right? Because if these devices become more and more common,
Yeah.
are they going to start covering them, as a viable alternative to those traditional therapies? And then the other thing that comes to mind is if treatment becomes more accessible because it's less expensive and more convenient, then people might be more likely to address their issues earlier on,
Right.
which could lead to better outcomes in the long run. So it's kind of a domino effect.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that really ties into the whole issue of clinician shortages too, right? Like,
Hmm.
especially in areas like pelvic floor therapy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They mentioned there's millions of women who could benefit from this type of therapy, but there's only a limited number of therapists available, particularly in the U.S. So by providing these tools that people can use at home, It allows them to start addressing their issues right away without having to wait months for an appointment, which is often the case.
Exactly. And for the clinics themselves, it could really help them streamline their services, because if they can integrate these devices into their treatment plans, they might be able to reduce the number of hands-on sessions that are needed
Right.
and still get good results. So they actually give an example. They say that sometimes they can cut down from like 36 sessions to just 2.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a huge difference. And then there's also the potential for clinics to generate a new revenue stream by selling these devices directly to their patients. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I wonder how that might change the dynamic between the therapist and the patient,
Yeah.
because it seems like it would free up the therapist to focus on more complex cases while the patient can take care of the more routine aspects of their therapy at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also ties in nicely with the whole telehealth trend because, patients who can't easily get to a clinic can still receive treatment
Yeah.
if they have a device and they're being guided remotely. So it really opens up a lot of possibilities.
That's a great point. Okay, so we've talked about, the cost savings, the convenience, but what about the effectiveness? Like, how well do these devices actually work for people? And MV Health really emphasizes improved patient compliance and long-term adherence compared to traditional therapies, which often have high dropout rates.
Yeah, that's a key point because what good is a treatment if people don't actually stick with it,
Yeah.
right? So why do you think that is? Why are people more likely to stay engaged with these devices?
I mean, I'm guessing the convenience of at-home use is a big factor, right?
Yeah, I think so. It just makes it so much easier to incorporate into your routine, And potentially there are easier to follow guides, although we don't have specifics on that here. But you can imagine that having clear instructions and being able to use it in the comfort and privacy of your own home would make a big difference. And they also mentioned the possibility of remote monitoring. So even though they don't go into a lot of detail about that, it sounds like they might be able to track people's progress remotely,
Yeah.
which could also help keep them motivated.
Right. And it's really important to remember that these aren't just like consumer gadgets.
Yeah.
MV Health really stresses that these are doctor-designed devices that are backed by a decade of research and clinical studies.
Yeah.
It's not just like some, random thing you're buying off the internet.
Yeah, exactly. There's
Yeah.
real science behind it. Yeah.
And that gives it a level of legitimacy, especially when you're dealing with something as sensitive as sexual health.
Hmm.
And they're really positioning these devices as, non-pharmaceutical alternatives for a whole range of issues. So that's another attractive aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole idea of clinical excellence and the trust that they've built over time is super important in this field. The fact that they've invested over $20 million in research and development.
Wow.
Yeah, in regulatory compliance and clinical research and, building their brand, it really shows that they're serious about this.
It does. Yeah, it's not just a quick money grab or something.
And long-term vision.
And they do talk about, how long it takes to develop a product, right? Like it can be 3 to 5 years to get to the point where you're ready for clinical trials, and then another 2 to 3 years before you start publishing findings and actually proving that it works on a large scale. So it's a very thorough process.
For sure. Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
And speaking of being thorough, they also have quite the intellectual property portfolio with 38 patents and design registrations and 70 trademarks. So that's a pretty substantial amount of protection for their innovations. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it shows that they've really developed some unique technologies and designs that they want to protect, and it creates a barrier to entry for competitors because they can't just copy what MV Health is doing. And it also potentially makes them more attractive to investors or partners down the line because they have that strong IP foundation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, beyond just the patents and the technology, there's also the trust that they've built through these endorsements from really well-respected doctors in the field. And they actually include direct quotes from some of these key opinion leaders like Dr. Alexandra Dubinskaya and Dr. Rachel Rubin, who, have really positive things to say about integrating these devices into their patient care.
Yeah. And those endorsements really carry weight.
Yeah.
Especially Dr. Dubinskaya's statement where she talks about endorsing the company and believing in their work. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement.
It is, yeah. And Dr. Rubin also talks about how grateful her patients are and how easy it is to integrate the devices into treatment plans. So you're getting that perspective from the clinician as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of social proof can be really influential for both patients and other doctors. It's like, okay, if these respected figures are using these devices, then maybe I should consider it too.
Yeah, it definitely adds legitimacy. And they're also making moves to become more integrated into the traditional healthcare system.
Hmm.
Like their devices are eligible for partial reimbursement through FSA and HSA accounts, and they're actively trying to get full reimbursement from CMS. So that shows that they're serious about, being part of the mainstream medical landscape.
Yeah, for sure. And their market leadership across both direct-to-consumer sales and partnerships with healthcare professionals, hospitals, distributors, it all points to a strong demand for their products.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so they've clearly got a solid foundation based on, clinical evidence and market traction.
Yeah.
But let's talk about their research and development capabilities, because they claim to have best-in-class R&D. What do they base that on?
Well, they really emphasize the depth of research that goes into their device.
Mm.
Design, the sophistication of the engineering, and the strength of their intellectual property as, key advantages. And they highlight this really interesting mix of expertise that they bring together. Like they've got people from medicine, defense, electronics, material science, ergonomic design. So it's this very multidisciplinary approach. And that's resulted in these patented award-winning devices.
Yeah, and they even mentioned winning a Design Week award where they actually beat out the Apple Watch, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's saying something.
It does suggest a really high level of design innovation. And I'm curious, how do you think expertise from fields like defense electronics translates into better medical devices?
Well, I imagine that technologies related to precision,
Yeah.
and sensor development and durability, those things are probably very transferable to the medical field. So it's like taking these really advanced engineering principles and applying them to healthcare, which I think is really smart.
Yeah, it's kind of like cross-pollination of ideas.
Right.
And they also talk about having this in-house capability to take a concept all the way to pilot production. So they have a lot of control over that early stage development process, which is probably really helpful for iterating and refining their designs. And it's also interesting that they're being sought out by larger companies for innovation and licensing, like they mentioned their work with pain care labs on back pain belts. So that shows that their R&D capabilities are recognized outside of their own product line.
Definitely. And in terms of concrete outcomes from their R&D, they point to their expertise in Class 2 medical devices, which, those are devices that have a moderate to high risk, so there's more regulatory scrutiny involved.
Okay.
And they have their proprietary body adapting technology and this extensive IP portfolio, and they've got a user base of over 200,000 patients, so that's a lot of real-world data. And,
Yeah.
and on top of that, they have 14 peer-reviewed studies published in medical journals, so that's a pretty significant body of work.
Yeah, it definitely backs up their claim of having strong R&D capabilities.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about their strategy for product design and future expansion, because it seems like they're really aiming for a wide audience.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Their product design strategy is very much focused on addressing those major sexual dysfunctions that affect people of all ages. And they describe this flywheel effect where, they get sales through over-the-counter channels and distribution partnerships, and that leads to rapid user growth.
Yeah, and they give this really relatable example of like a family, where different members are using MVHealth devices for their own specific needs. So you've got the daughter who's using the Soto for period pain, and the mom who's using the Legato, and the dad who's using the Molto for prostate health. And it just kind of shows how they're trying to position themselves as a brand for the whole family.
Yeah, and they actually point out that 30% of their customers have bought more than one device. So that suggests a pretty high level of satisfaction with the first purchase.
And it makes sense that if you're happy with one product, you might be more likely to try others from the same brand.
Exactly. And they've got several new products in the pipeline too, like Soto for period pain, Coppola for breast health issues, Forza E for erectile and ejaculation dysfunction, and Firmo for menopause symptoms. So they're really actively expanding their product line.
Yeah, and they're not just resting on their laurels. They're continuing to innovate and address those unmet needs.
And it's interesting because they believe that the underlying technology, the body adapting materials, the electronics and software, they think that has potential beyond just sexual health. So where else do you think this could be applied?
Well, I could see it being used in areas like chronic pain management, maybe devices that could conform to different parts of the body and deliver targeted vibration or other forms of stimulation. And there could also be applications in wearable technology for monitoring different physiological parameters, like heart rate, breathing, temperature, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this next part is where things get really interesting. They're talking about moving beyond treatment and into advanced diagnostics. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so this is like a whole new level. They're envisioning these medical devices actually becoming intelligent diagnostic platforms by incorporating sensor technology. And the idea is to move towards this more proactive, personalized healthcare approach where the device is not just treating a problem, but it's also helping to identify it earlier on or provide more detailed information about the patient's condition.
So instead of just reacting to a problem, it's like the device is helping you stay ahead of it.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're talking about integrating really sophisticated data analytics and diagnostic algorithms to analyze all the data that these sensors are collecting and then generate these actionable insights that can help with early detection and intervention for all sorts of conditions, from pelvic floor disorders to fertility issues, ED, prostate cancer even.
Wow. So how would these devices actually capture all this data?
So they're planning to embed these advanced sensors directly into the silicone of the devices, and these sensors would continuously monitor different things during use, like temperature changes, pressure changes, moisture levels, and potentially even hormonal indicators. So you're getting this constant stream of data.
And that data is being analyzed in real time.
Yeah. And that's where the algorithms come in. They can sift through all that data and identify patterns and anomalies that could be clinically significant.
Okay, so can you give me some specific examples of how a device that was originally designed for treatment could now also be used for diagnosis?
Sure. So let's say you have one of their intravaginal devices right now. Imagine that with added sensors, it could pick up on these subtle shifts in temperature, moisture pressure distribution that might indicate early signs of a pelvic floor disorder or even an infection.
Oh, wow, I see.
And then similarly, a device like the Molto, which is used for prostate stimulation, could be enhanced to analyze data related to pressure and other biomarkers that could potentially flag early signs of prostate enlargement or other issues.
That's amazing. So it's like the device is doing double duty.
Exactly. And I think this could really pave the way for more personalized and responsive treatments. Because imagine if the device could actually adjust the therapy in real time based on what the sensors are picking up.
Yeah.
So let's say you're using a device and the sensors detect that your muscles are particularly tense.
Right.
It could automatically modify the vibration patterns or the intensity to address that specific issue in that moment.
That's really cool. And they actually outline some specific areas where they're looking to innovate in diagnostics for both men and women.
Hmm.
So on the women's health side, what are some of the things they're working on?
So for women, they're exploring incorporating sensors into their pelvic floor devices to provide real-time monitoring of muscle activity, which could be really helpful for biofeedback therapy. And they're also envisioning devices that can analyze the vaginal microbiome, track fertility through basal body temperature monitoring, and assess things like vaginal dryness and arousal disorders by looking at moisture levels and blood flow.
Bro.
And then they're also looking at ways to help diagnose penetration pain and vaginismus by detecting muscle tension. And they're even developing an ECG-enabled bra for monitoring breast health. And they're considering using wearable sensors to track those physiological changes that happen during menstrual pain. So it's a pretty wide range of applications.
That's incredible. And what about on the men's health side? What kind of diagnostic innovations are they looking at?
So for men, they're focusing on devices that can monitor erection quality in real time, which could provide early warning signs of erectile dysfunction and maybe even suggest underlying cardiovascular problems.
Oh, wow.
And then they're also developing wearable stimulation devices that can provide biofeedback for managing ejaculation disorders. And they're looking at sensors for tracking testicular health biosensors for monitoring hormone levels that are related to male fertility at home, urine analysis, and pressure sensors for prostate pain and early prostate cancer detection, and even connected devices for monitoring urinary flow and non-invasive ultrasound patches for assessing urinary health.
Wow, it's like a whole new world of men's health monitoring.
It's really exciting to see what they're coming up with.
Yeah. Okay, so they're obviously developing all these really innovative products, but that must require a very streamlined process.
Mm.
What does their new product development strategy look like?
So they've got a very structured approach that starts with thorough research and scoping, and that involves looking at, key life stages and health events, the size of the potential user population, existing research on vibration therapy, and crucially getting input from clinicians from the very beginning.
Okay.
And then they move on to design principles, and they actually use this really interesting term. They talk about creating enchanted objects. And what they mean by that is products that are outwardly very simple and user-friendly, but that have this really sophisticated technology underneath. So it's kind of like that idea of hiding the complexity from the user.
Yeah, I like that term, enchanted objects. It does make you think of something that's both beautiful and functional.
right? It's not just a cold medical device. It's something that's designed to be pleasurable to use as well. And they also prioritize discretion and ease of use, which is important for people who are dealing with sensitive issues.
Of course. And then what happens after the design phase?
So then they move into detailed scoping, where they consider the relevant anatomy, how the device will fit the body, the specific vibration parameters, session duration, and how they can leverage their existing technology. And then they go into prototyping and pilot production, where they create these initial small-scale versions of the device in-house so they can test it out, refine the design, and figure out the manufacturing processes before they scale up.
Right.
And then finally, they place a lot of emphasis on getting feedback from both healthcare professionals and users, and they conduct medical studies to make sure that their products are effective and safe.
And they have a pretty aggressive timeline for all of this, don't they?
Yeah, their goal is to go from initial concept to having a product ready for clinicians within 12 months, and with a budget of under $1 million, which is pretty remarkable for the medical device industry.
It is, yeah. It
Yeah.
speaks to their efficiency and focus. Okay, so the foundation for all of this technology seems to be the clinical evidence supporting the use of vibration therapy. What did the material say about that?
So they emphasize that there's substantial clinical evidence, including studies on similar devices that have already been approved that show how effective precise vibration therapy can be for improving blood flow, increasing arousal, and relieving pain. And they talk about several key biological mechanisms and benefits, like its ability to improve circulation, the fact that it's a personalized approach, it's non-medicinal, it's easy to use. And there's actually over 50 years of research supporting its use for both men and women's sexual health.
Wow, 50 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, it's not a new idea, but it's really gaining traction now. And they have a section in the material where they reference a selection of papers, which basically means that their claims are backed up by publications in scientific journals. So it's not just their own internal research. They're citing studies that have been peer-reviewed and published in reputable sources.
And they give some specific examples of findings from those studies, right?
Yes, they do. They talk about how their devices have been shown to be effective for a range of conditions, including genitopelvic pain, arousal disorder, anorgasmia, and various types of erectile dysfunction, including ED after cancer treatment, and even vaginismus. And they give specific numbers. Like, for example, a study showed a 5-fold improvement in pain scores for genitopelvic pain with the Crescendo device. And another study showed a significant improvement in erectile function with the Tenuto Mini for men with non-organic ED.
That's really impressive, and it definitely adds credibility to their claims. Okay, so behind every successful company, there's a strong leadership team. What can you tell me about the people who are driving MVHealth?
So the leadership team is described as this group of really passionate and experienced individuals who are pioneers in this field of women's and men's health devices. And they highlight a few key figures in their background. So there's Professor Prokar Dasgupta, who's the chief medical officer, and he has over 30 years of experience in urology and related fields, and he holds prestigious academic positions, and he's received a lot of awards and honors.
Wow, so he's a real expert in the field.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's Dr. Sum Rakshit, who's the co-founder and CEO, and he has a strong background in biomedical engineering. And he's actually got a track record of entrepreneurial success in sensor technology. So that's really relevant to what MVHealth is doing.
Yeah, for sure. And who else is on the team?
So there's Robert Weekly, who's the co-founder and CTO, and he has a ton of experience in electronics and software development, including work in defense and consumer electronics. So he's got that technical expertise. And then there's Shanshan Zhu, who's the co-founder and CFO, COO, and she brings a wealth of experience in finance and operations. So it's a really well-rounded team with expertise in all the key areas that a company like this needs.
Yeah, it sounds like they've got all their bases covered, and they also emphasize the cohesive organizational structure and the extensive industry experience within their teams across all the different functions.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that they're operating with a relatively lean team of under 20 people, but they're generating over $10 million in annual revenue.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
It is. It shows that they're very efficient. And they also highlight the high level of experience within the team. Like, a significant percentage of their employees have over a decade of experience in their respective fields, and a lot of them have advanced degrees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they've got a really good track record of retaining employees. Like 50% of the team has been with the company for over 5 years, so that speaks to a stable and experienced workforce.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk about the market opportunity, because it seems like they're addressing areas with some pretty significant unmet needs.
Right, and they really emphasize that both the women's and men's health markets are vastly underserved, with millions of people experiencing various conditions and often not receiving adequate treatment. And they provide some pretty startling statistics to back that up.
Okay, like what kind of statistics?
So, for example, in women's health, they cite studies showing that a huge percentage of new mothers experience persistent pain and sexual dysfunction after childbirth. And then they talk about the massive market related to menopause, which is only going to grow as the population ages. And a significant portion of women going through menopause are experiencing symptoms, but they're not seeking help, or they're not even aware of the treatment options available. And then there's also the statistics around period pain during intercourse, and arousal disorders, which show just how widespread these issues are.
Yeah, those numbers are really eye-opening. And what about the potential market on the men's health side?
So similarly, they point out that prostate health issues are a major concern for men, with a large percentage experiencing erectile dysfunction following prostate cancer treatment. And they also highlight how common ejaculation disorders and erectile dysfunction are across different age groups. And then there are also pelvic health issues and desire disorders, which represent substantial underserved markets in men's health. So the fact that MVHealth has products that cater to both genders means that they have a really broad market opportunity.
Yeah, it's a smart strategy for sure. Okay, so finally, let's take a quick look at their journey so far, the decade of progress and the key milestones that they've achieved.
So they highlight their founding in 2014, and then they go through this timeline of significant milestones over the past 10 years, including major product launches like the Crescendo and Tenuto lines, the development of their accompanying apps, successful rounds of funding that have increased the company's valuation recognition through various design and business awards coverage in major media outlets, growth of their intellectual property portfolio, and key achievements like getting FSHSA eligibility and endorsement from the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, it's quite a list of accomplishments.
It is. It really shows how much they've accomplished in a relatively short amount of time.
So to wrap up our deep dive into MV Health, what are the key takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think it's clear that MVHealth has established itself as a leader in this industry through their strong emphasis on clinical research, their commitment to technological innovation, and their comprehensive range of products that address a wide variety of needs for both men and women. And they're not just creating devices, they're trying to offer solutions that are more accessible, more cost-effective, and that can be integrated into the broader healthcare system. And their significant investment in R&D and their vision for incorporating diagnostic capabilities all suggest that they're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and for you, the listener who's interested in getting up to speed on this company and their potential quickly and efficiently, we hope this deep dive has provided you with a good overview of MV Health's approach and how they could be impacting the future of sexual health treatment.
Definitely. And this brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Given how significant and often unspoken the needs are in this area for both men and women, how do you think the continued integration of technology and personalized devices like these is going to change how we understand and manage these conditions in the years to come? What are the broader implications for society of destigmatizing and actively innovating in this really important area of healthcare? It's definitely something to think about as technology continues to evolve.
Absolutely. Lots to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into MV Health.
You're welcome. It was a fascinating one.
Until next time.